Tragic regrets, revisionist history, deep-rooted prejudice, and a gentle heart behind solid stone. Ruijerd has always stood as one of my favorite characters of the Mushoku Tensei series, being the front and center example of prejudice of the world, and the seemingly impossible task of correcting preconceived notions that people have of a race. There's a deep-rooted hatred of the Superd tribe, and throughout Ruijerd's journey across the world following the displacement incident, we see how sometimes efforts go unnoticed, or are just ignored. Welcome back to yet another skipped content video for the first season of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. In this video, I want to highlight everything about Ruijerd and the Superds, everything that Ruijerd had learned about them, and his experiences journeying alongside Ruijerd. While the anime did handle quite a bit of this character very well, there's still some major nuggets of knowledge that unfortunately was skipped, so let's dive into it. Our first look at the Superd race starts with Roxy's lessons with Ruijerd in Volume 1. While correcting on the superstitions that brightly colored hair signified danger, she explained that it all came from a demonic race from the Brabanos region, the Superds. They're described as having emerald green hair with a red jewel that sits in their forehead. The red jewel is their third eye, allowing them to see the flow of magic. During the war 400 years ago, they went on a brutal rampage. They were known to attack allied demon settlements and slaughter the women and children. On the battlefield, they'd kill the enemy before turning on their own allies. After only a decade war, they became feared by friend and foe alike. They were so despised that persecution following the war drove them from the demon continent. Even to this day, children would often be told stories to keep them behaving good. Roxy herself was told not to stay up late or a Superd would come and eat her. Roxy also mentioned that the Migurdians and the Superd people were closely related, and thus the Migurdians for a while were treated much the same as Superds. Roxy told Ruijerd that he should avoid going near Superds. If interacting with them was unavoidable, he should never make them mad. Doing so could get their entire family killed. We then jump to the point that Ruijerd met his first Superd, following the displacement incident. Ruijerd was told by the man god to rely on a Superd, Ruijerd. This was counter to his desire to just grab Eris and just flee. He wanted to trust what Roxy told him, as she never steered him wrong. But he did know all about prejudice and discrimination from his old world. He knew that witch hunts happened, and people were misunderstood. He knew that Roxy wouldn't lie to him, but he figured there was a possibility that she could just have the wrong idea. In the end, when Ruijerd offered his aid in order to get them home, Ruijerd accepted it. Honestly, the entire time, Ruijerd was confused by the fact that Ruijerd wasn't afraid of him, which made Ruijerd feel that this guy was surprisingly insecure. Though Ruijerd does acknowledge that, yes, most people in this world, if they met Ruijerd, would probably be screaming their lungs out. The war was over 400 years ago, and most prejudice against demons had faded. But Superds were a special case. Every race seemed to hate them. And without knowledge of racism in his old world, Ruijerd would probably shriek in terror as well. It's kind of one of the nice benefits of Ruijerd being from another world. One of those nice things about this story and how it always sorts of, for once, in most isekais, actually utilizes a lot of pre-knowledge in order to assess the situation in this new world. As Ruijerd is journeying with Ruijerd, he notes that he has a strong sense of honor. A great deal of honor is in protecting children. Despite warnings that Superds had short tempers, he knows that Ruijerd doesn't even mind whenever Eris says some offhand comments. At some point, Ruijerd, and Eris arrive at the Migurdia Village. While talking with the village elder, Ruckus, Ruijerd gained a lot of insight into Ruijerd's life. First off, that Ruijerd has dealt with a lot of problems in nearby villages, being chased away by the garrisons, having squads formed to hunt him down, really making it clear to Ruijerd that people of the Demon Continent hated Superds as much as Asura. That said, Ruijerd seemed to be accepted by the Migurdia Village. This seemed to be because Ruijerd gained their trust 5 years prior because he saved a child. Additionally, Ruijerd learned that Ruijerd had a goal that he was striving for. Simply, he wanted to convince everyone that Superds aren't the wicked monsters that they made him out to be. When Ruijerd pointed out the history that he was told about the Superds pretty much killing friend and enemy alike, Ruijerd snapped before telling him the story, the true story, of the Superds. The demon god Laplace was known as a hero who united the demonic races, winning them rights that humankind had long denied them. The Superds rallied to Laplace's banner very early in the campaign. They possessed outstanding agility and a capacity to sense the presence of their foe. In addition, their strength in battle was second to none. They served as one of Laplace's personal forces, specializing in ambushes and nighttime raids. Thanks to the third eye on their forehead, they were always aware of their surroundings. It was impossible to take them by surprise or to avoid their deadly attacks. In other words, they were an elite group. At the time, the word Superd was spoken in tones of respect and awe throughout the Demon Continent. But then came Laplace's war. In the middle stage of the conflict, just as the demons were beginning their invasion of the Central Continent, Laplace called upon the warriors bearing a certain type of weapon, one that would later become known as the Devil's Spears. He offered these spears to his soldiers as gifts. They closely resembled the tridents that the Superds wielded in combat, but they were jet black in color. Even at first glance, there was clearly something ominous about them. Naturally, some of the warriors objected to use them, insisting that Superd's spear was their heart and soul. They could never cast aside their weapons for some cursed thing. But this was a gift from Laplace, their master. In the end, Ruijerd, the group's leader, ordered his soldiers to use the new spears out of sheer loyalty to Laplace. Ruijerd was their leader. Ruijerd told them to take the cursed spears. Yes, he was present at the time, later identified by his guild card as being 566 years old, making him roughly 166 when he first took up the spears. The group then stuck their old spears into the ground and began to use the devil spears in battle. These new weapons were enormously powerful. They amplified the bearer's physical capabilities several times over, nullified the effects of human magic, and heightened the Superds' already sharp senses even further. The Superds were now nearly invincible, but in exchange, they were gradually transformed. The more blood their new spears tasted, the more corrupt their souls grew. The warriors didn't even recognize what was happening to them. They lost their sanity in increments, none more quickly than any other. And so, no one even noticed they, or those around them, were changing. In time, this led to tragedy. The Superds lost the ability to distinguish between friends and foes, and began to attack nearly anyone they encountered indiscriminately, young and old. They showed no mercy to women, or even children. They showed no mercy to anyone at all. Ruijerd still remembered those days with vivid clarity. Before long, demonkind at large came to call the Superds traitors to their cause, and word spread amongst the humans that they were bloodthirsty devils. At that time, Ruijerd and his companions smiled happily at these insults, taking them to be the highest praise. The Superds were surrounded by enemies, but their cursed spears made them a force to be reckoned with. Every warrior in the band now fought with a strength of 1,000 men. No army could hope to destroy them. They quickly became the single most feared combat unit in the entire world. However, that didn't mean that they suffered no losses. Now a hated enemy to both humanity and demonkind, they were forced to endure near constant battles, day and night. Slowly but steadily, their numbers began to decrease. Still, none of them questioned the path they were following. In their madness, the thought of death in battle brought them bliss. After some time, a rumor reached the Superb band that there was a village that was under attack. Ruijerd's home village. This is where it gets tragic. It was a trap meant to lure them to their doom. But, by this point, none of them were clear-headed enough to suspect anything. The warriors returned to their home for the first time in a while, and proceeded to attack it. They came there knowing it's under attack, and immediately attacked it. They didn't go there and protect it. They immediately attacked it. It was simple. They'd found people, which meant they had to kill them. Ruijerd murdered his parents, his wife, his sisters, and eventually his own child. Ruijerd's son was still young, but he had been trained to become a warrior. It was far from an even fight. But, in his final moments, the boy managed to break his father's jet black spear. In an instant, Ruijerd's pleasant dream ended, and his nightmare began. There was something hard and crunchy in his mouth. Realizing that it was his own son's finger, he spat it out in horror. It's like he's fighting, killing indiscriminately, and then suddenly his spear breaks, and he wakes up, and he's got his own son's finger in his mouth. His first thought was ending his own life, but he forced it from his mind. There was something he simply had to do before he died, an enemy that he had to destroy, no matter what the cost. By this point, the Superds village was totally surrounded by the demon army, sent to exterminate them. Only 10 of his soldiers remained. When they first received their devil spears, this had been a band of nearly 200 daring, valiant fighters. Now a bare handful survived, and they were all in rough shape. Some had lost an arm, others an eye or a jewel on their forehead. But even battered, bruised, and utterly outnumbered, they stared belligerently at the 1,000-strong forces surrounding them, and they were all going to die in vain. Ruijerd snatched the devil's spears from his companions, broke them apart. One by one, the others came to their senses, and their aggressive glares gave way to expressions of shock and disbelief. Many began to weep uncontrollably, lamenting their murder of their families. Still, none asked to be returned to the oblivion of their trance. They were made of sterner stuff than that. Together, they swore an oath to get their revenge on Laplace. Not a single one blamed Ruijerd for what transpired. That's big. They were no longer mindless killers, nor proud warriors. They were fallen, ruined creatures, with only revenge to live for. Ruijerd didn't know what came of those other 10, but he suspected they were dead. Without the power of the devil's spears, the Superds were nothing more than unusually effective soldiers. They had no choice but to use whatever tridents they could find, rather than the ones they had grown used to in years of battle. By all rights, none of them should have survived. Somehow, Ruijerd managed to escape, but he was badly wounded in the battle, and spent the next 3 days and nights in the verge of death. The one and only thing that he carried with him was his son's trident, with which the dead boy had broken the devil's spears and saved his father. In the end, after several years of hiding, Ruijerd did get his revenge. As the 3 heroes battled the demon god Laplace, he jumped in and assisted them, managed to score a blow on his hated enemy. But of course, the defeat of Laplace wasn't enough to undo all the damage that was done. the surviving Superds were driven from the villages and scattered across the world. To help them escape their pursuers, Ruijerd was forced to kill more of his former demon allies. In those first years after the war, the attack on his people was truly brutal, and he fought back just as viciously. At this point, Ruijerd hasn't met another Superds in nearly 300 years. He didn't know if his own kind was wiped out entirely, or if they managed to survive and formed a new village in some secret location. Ruijerd followed up his story by saying Laplace was to blame for all this. Of course, but I, too, bear responsibility for the disgrace I brought upon my people. Even if I'm the last of my kind, I want to tell the world the truth. With that story, Ruijerd fell silent once again. It was at this point that Ruijerd, knowing what it was like to be falsely attacked, accepted to help Ruijerd with his task. However, he could. As Ruijerd continued his journey with Ruijerd and Edis, eventually he learned the truth behind the Superds spears. Ruijerd explained that the Superds spears is made out of their soul. Every Superds is born with a tail. It grew with them until they reached a certain age, at which point it stiffened up and fell off. Yet even when separated, it was still somehow part of their body. The more they used it, the more sharper and deadly it grew. Enough time and effort, these tridents would become peerless weapons, virtually unbreakable and capable of piercing through pretty much anything. That was why they mustn't cast aside their spear until the day they die. A mistake that Ruijerd once made before. We then jump to Rikarisu. Ruijerd started his plan to improve the name of the Superds. Creating a party called Dead End, they would do tasks and help other people. Ruijerd gave Ruijerd Roxy's pendant, then dyed his hair blue, and gave him the name Royce. Ruijerd's new identity would be a Migurdian who was impersonating the infamous Superds warrior Dead End. While trying to put this whole plan into play, eventually Ruijerd and Ruijerd would run into a group that was kidnapping pets. After one of them strikes Ruijerd instantly kills them. This is incredibly shocking to Ruijerd, reminding him how dangerous Ruijerd really was. But still, he tried to talk him into refraining from ever taking lives, as it countered their mission of improving the Superds' name. Continuing the journey, Ruijerd eventually learned that Ruijerd sort of has a basic set of rules that he goes by. A warrior must never harm a child. A warrior is obligated to protect a child. A warrior must never forsake his comrades. And a warrior is obligated to protect his comrades. Eventually, Ruijerd, and Edis would arrive in the holy country of Milis. During the time that Ruijerd was reuniting with his father, Paul, and Edis was goblin slaying, Ruijerd visited a man named Gash that he sensed while they were approaching the city. Yes, the anime had Ruijerd following Edis around, but that wasn't the case. He actually went to go meet this guy. Ruijerd later told Ruijerd that he met Gash before on the Demon Continent about 40 years ago. After rescuing Gash's traveling party from a group of monsters that nearly killed him, Gash was only a child at the time, and he initially looked at Ruijerd with a mixture of terror and hostility. After spending some time together though, they parted on relatively friendly terms. Ruijerd delivered him safely to the nearest town, and Gash told him to stop by if he ever happened to go to Milshan. Since they never left the Demon Continent, Ruijerd had completely forgotten about the offer, but then he happened to spot the man with his third eye as they circled around the city's outer wall, and it all came back to him. Interested to see how the years had treated Gash, if also somewhat anxious that the man might have forgotten about him entirely, Ruijerd headed over and paid him a visit. Gash had recognized him instantly and showered him with hospitality. At first, Ruijerd was just intending to say hello, but apparently the two of them really hit it off. He ended up recounting the entire story of their journey so far, and once he was finished, Gash wrote him a letter on the spot and told him to give it to the man in charge of Westport. Later on, Ruijerd would find out what this said. This man is of the Superds. Nonetheless, I owe him a great debt. He is a man of few words, but noble in character. Waive all customary fees and see him safely to the central continent. The letter was signed Galgar Nash Vanek, commander of the Missionary Knights. Yes, leader of one of the 3 holy military orders of Milis. Anime? Hello? We didn't want to include that? It seems kind of important, anime adaptation. There's a lot of little things like this where it seems like it's really significant, but for some reason they felt it wasn't important for the anime adaptation. Ruijerd thought, wait, I thought his name was Gash. All he could think of is there's a possibility that, yes, technically, the leader of the Missionary Knights being affiliated with a Superds would probably been bad, so he's been using an alias. All that said, sadly, this did not do much to aid them. Duke Bakshil, who was running the West Port, pretty much discarded it, saying that it was fake. He felt there was no way that Galgar would write a letter in order to assist a lowly demon. Despite this, Ruijerd's aunt, Therese, shows up to remedy the situation. However, later giving him a firm warning. You'd be smarter not to mention the word Superds within the holy country of Milis. One of the Milis' church's oldest teachings holds that demonkind should be totally expelled. There was a certain group within the church, the Temple Knights, who took old doctrines seriously. The doctrine that all demons should be driven out of the Milis continent. With Superds being infamous, if the word got around that one was in Milis, Knights would come after him with everything they had. Therese, being a part of the Knights as well, was giving Ruijerd a pass. Mainly because, yes, and this was in the Goblin Slaying chapter, Edis had saved her and a blessed child from assassins. But ordinarily, she wouldn't have overlooked this. While Edis responded to this, claiming that they would never beat Ruijerd, Therese conceded that she might be right. But the Temple Knights were such fanatics that they would fight a battle even if they knew they didn't stand a chance. In closing, Therese warned Ruijerd to be careful if he ever happened to return to the Male's continent. It all drove home to Ruijerd how deep-seated humanity's prejudice were towards the demon kind. Jumping forward in time, at the point where Ruijerd runs into Ørsted, the dragon god, he's fatally injured and then he has a talk with the man god. Ruijerd discovers the truth behind the Superds, the spears, and Laplace. The man god told Ruijerd that the Superds were cursed to be feared. Similar to the dragon god Ørsted, Laplace had a curse of fear on him. He transferred this curse to the spears and passed it on to the Superd tribes. They made their green hair a key to its effectiveness. While Ruijerd was mad at the man god for not explaining this before, and assumed that everything had been pointless, the man god explained that the curse on the Superd tribe was gradually fading over time. A bit of it remained in Ruijerd, but since he cut his hair, that ultimately reduced its effectiveness. Additionally, with his involvement with Ruijerd, the curse had been fading. There was still a deep-rooted sense of discrimination that remained, but with Ruijerd's efforts, that could all eventually change. All something that Ruijerd told Ruijerd later on, obviously warning him to, take it with a grain of salt, it was enough to leave Ruijerd in tears. Jumping forward to the refugee camp, Ruijerd parts ways with Ruijerd and Edis. Asking him to come all the way to the refugee camp with them, Ruijerd said it was unnecessary. The two of them were both warriors now. They didn't need his protection. At this point, Ruijerd is recognizing Ruijerd and Edis as warriors, not children. Ruijerd told Ruijerd, "If you hadn't been with us, I'm sure that we wouldn't have made it this far in 3 years." Ruijerd replied, "No, I'm sure you could have done it." Ruijerd replied, "That's not true. I'm too careless about some things, so we would have fallen afoul of something along the way." To which Ruijerd said, "As long as you're able to recognize that, you'd be fine." There was a numerous amount of points in which Ruijerd had found himself at his wit's end, such as when he was taken captive in Sharon. If Ruijerd hadn't been with them, he would have probably panicked even further. Because yes, technically when he was captured, he was constantly thinking that Ruijerd would probably save him. Ruijerd followed up, "Ruijerd, I told you this before. As a magician, you've already attained a kind of perfection. Despite all the talent that you possess, you still don't let it get to your head. You should be aware of how much it means if you're able to do that at your age." Ruijerd responded by bowing his head, which Ruijerd told him not to bow to him. When asking why, Ruijerd said that you may think that I have done a lot for you, but I think you've done a lot for me. Thanks to you, I see hope that my tribe can regain its honor once more. Ruijerd didn't think that he did anything for him. Everything that he did failed, but Ruijerd followed up. "No, you did a lot. You taught me that my straightforward method of saving children wasn't the only one out there." While not seemingly effective, Ruijerd said, "I've changed. I remember all of it." The words of the old woman in Rikarisu City, who, thanks to your schemes, said she didn't find the Superds tribe scary. The looks on those adventurers' faces when they heard the name Dead End, how they weren't frightened, but rather laughed cheerfully. The closeness I felt with the warriors of the Doldia tribe, and how they accepted me even after I told them I was a Superd, and the soldiers of the Sharon kingdom, and how they cried and thanked me when they were reunited with their families. When Ruijerd said that he did everything himself, Ruijerd said, "No, I couldn't do anything by myself. In the 400 years since the war, I worked alone, unable to take a single step forward. The one who showed me that step was you, Ruijerd." Ruijerd passed it off as just the advice from the man god, but Ruijerd said, "I don't care about some god I've never seen. The person who really helped me was you. No matter what you think, I feel a debt of gratitude to you. That's why I don't want you to lower your head at me. The two of us are equals. If you want to thank me, look me in the eyes." At that point, they shook hands. I'll say it again. "Thank you, Ruijerd, for all you've done for me." Ruijerd replied, "And the same to you. Thank you for everything you did for us." He then turned to Edis and asked if he could treat her like a child one last time. She said, "Fine, whatever." And with a faint smile, Ruijerd stroked her head. "Edis, you have a talent, enough to become far, far stronger than me." She thought it was a lie, but then he told her, "You survived an attack in a battle from a man who bears the name of a god. You understand what that means, right?" To which she responded, "I understand." He then dropped his hand off her head. Ruijerd asked what he was planning on doing next, which his goal was to go to find anybody else of the Superd tribe. He also told Ruijerd that if he had some spare time, he would help find his mother. And that is the story of Ruijerd and Superds that we know so far with the anime adaptation of Mushoku Tensei. A really fantastic story that, like I said, is really well covered in the anime adaptation, but there's a lot of integral details that are kind of spread throughout the series. Namely the idea that Ruijerd himself was the leader of the Superds, was the one that told them to pick up the cursed spears, and yes, getting into more details about the death of his son. The why I think that's important is because it puts a little more emphasis upon Ruijerd and his own guilt, that he himself stained his hands, thus adding a lot more difficulty for him to face his own haunting ghost that he has in his past. Additionally, I like the whole aspect of the spears themselves and how they are an extension of the Superd themselves. I have this ongoing theory that has not even been said one way or the other that I'm still holding on to, is that I truly do believe that the spear that Ruijerd carries, although he says it is his son's, which, yes, I would assume that he could identify it that way, may in fact be Ruijerd's. That his son went and retrieved his spear and used it to break the cursed spear. Mainly because it talks about how it gets stronger as they get older, and his son wasn't like really old. So my assumption is there's a possibility that Ruijerd himself could have taken that spear. And maybe he's just assigning it to his son so that he never forgets his son. Additionally, I really do love the parting of Ruijerd, Eddis, and Rudius in the novel series, because it gives so much more emphasis on the idea that Ruijerd didn't help Rudius so much that Rudius helped him. Traveling for so many hundreds of years, never progressing, never getting better. Yes, 400 years has passed, and nothing has changed. But now, suddenly, Ruijerd is seeing change. That's why he starts to cry when he hears that there's a possibility this is a curse. And not only that it's a curse, but it's a curse that is fading. He immediately thinks when he hears curse, oh, well, I can't change it then. But no, it's fading. It's a hope. It's a hope that he now has and he's holding on to. Rudius has done so much for him. Before I wrap things up, we do have some side facts that I thought were kind of interesting that were sprinkled throughout the series. First one is that people didn't use spears, as Rudius regularly notes that stores don't carry them. This was obviously due to the spears being seen as evil, as Superds made use of tridents. When a spear would appear in stories, it was usually wielded by a wicked villain, the kind that would devour friend and foe alike, and slaughter indiscriminately. Yes, obviously when Rudius first met Sylphie, she had green hair. She was being bullied in the Migurdia Village because of this green hair. Kids were raised to fear it, and thus they thought that she might be possibly a Superd. And yes, Rudius himself, when he approached her, thought that she possibly was a Superd, but then he quickly sighed the moment that he seen that she didn't have a jewel embedded in her forehead. And finally, Eddis, during her perspective chapter inside of Volume 6, she mentioned the idea that when she first spotted Ruijerd when they first got displaced, she thought that she was being punished for being selfish, because her mother told her that if she was ever selfish, she'd be punished by a Superd. And yes, shortly before this, she had rejected betting Rudius, even though her mother told her to do that. And that's all I have for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this skipped content expansion of the story of Superds and Ruijerd himself. If you did enjoy this content, I hope that you'll stick around. If you're new to the channel, make sure that subscribe button so you got my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, I'll be doing skip content videos for the first season. Not getting into any kind of spoilers that goes beyond what the anime has adapted. So if you're looking for something to supplement until the season comes back, definitely stick around. Again, I hope you guys enjoy this video. If you want to support this content more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, membership button down below. Greatly, greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel. It means so much to me, and y'all take care.